Hello, Christopher.
What's up, Jason?
What's up is that 1 second pause where I hit record and then didn't talk.
Yeah, I miss your little audio jingles, you know?
I know. I thought about putting one in. I'm thinking about putting a bleep button in so like I can
Mm,
talk as vulgar as I usually do, but still keep it like clean on
yeah.
the
Every
like.
time someone says JavaScript, you beep it out.
Yeah, that's my goal, which might make it difficult in the future
Yeah.
with some of our guests coming on. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. It's rainy and, just been indoors again all day. Tired of this
Life.
cold weather, but we're approaching the end of that, thankfully.
I would like to say that we are, but like Memphis weather is notorious for being like 30 degrees one day, 70 the next for like 2 weeks, and then like 5 degrees. So
Yeah, that's pretty much how ours is here in Missouri. Like, same thing, and then the roads just get terrible. There's like giant holes in them for the next 6 months. Yeah, not fun.
how far apart are we? Like I know it's like a 4 hour drive, but like do you know how many miles are between us?
I don't know actually.
Hold
That's a
on.
good question.
I got this.
Because I was just asking Andrew and Slack about coming to join us. By the way, anyone that wants to come meet us can meet us at RailsConf. We're both going
Yeah.
this year for sure, so that's exciting.
There are 283 miles between our cities. So that makes sense that we would have somewhat similar
Yeah,
weather patterns.
yeah. You're just a little bit east and south.
Yeah, we're just like the weather just gets dirtier as you come south. And
Yeah,
then like
you get our dirt from St. Louis
by the
mixed
time
it
I
your
like
way.
get to New Orleans in like May, I'm like just covered in sweat. And it's like for no reason. Anyway, awesome. Today we have yet another guest. What is that? YAG. That's just YAG. Uh I am, as always, recently very excited about our guest joining us today. He is someone who has influenced a lot of my development chops in the last couple of years, and was excited to meet him at Southeast Ruby our first year. Someone I consider a friend now. So, Tim, do you mind just giving us a brief introduction?
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Tim Riley. I'm based here in Canberra, Australia, where it is actually a very pleasant day today. In the high 20s, as we use it in the Celsius measure of temperature. But yeah, I live here with my wife and two young children. And in the Ruby world, I'm a part of a company called IceLab. We're a design agency who do a lot of Ruby work on the back end. And I'm also involved in some open source projects as well.
Awesome. For those who don't convert Celsius to Fahrenheit, like me, DuckDuckGo says 28 degrees Celsius is 82.4 degrees Fahrenheit. So there's that.
Nice. That sounds really nice right about now.
Tim, thanks for joining us. If it's all right with you, we'll just go ahead and start throwing questions your way.
Let's do it.
So my first question for you is, how did you get into programming and subsequently into Ruby?
I suppose I was one of the many humans who found an interest in computers as a young kid. I think I remember playing a lot of shareware games on my dad's XT computer, the kind you buy on the floppy disks from the news agencies. And then from there, later on, continued to like computers. And then at some point in high school, I had my wisdom teeth removed. And that was a watershed moment, I suppose, because as something to keep me amused while I was at home with a peanut face, I got one of those magazines from the newsagent that sort of teach you Linux. So I decided I would just wipe my computer, install Red Hat 5.2 or something, and Linux being the great environment for programming it is, I just started becoming interested in the kind of software development you can do in it. So like many people, picked up PHP as a first thing, and then before long, somehow find myself using Ruby. And if I remember correctly, my first project was an IRC bot. I was hanging out in IRC at the time with a bunch of Slackware Linux enthusiasts, and their hobby was writing bots in obscure languages, mostly in Bash. And I wasn't that mean to myself, so I found this thing coming out of Japan called Ruby, and went from there. And it's what I've been using ever since.
That's cool. So your introduction to Ruby actually wasn't necessarily through Rails.
No, and I think if I remember back, this is sort of 2001, 2002, so Rails wasn't even a thing yet. Yeah, it was like before that OG. Explosion. Yeah.
Wow. So Linux was kind of like your gateway into all of this.
Yeah, that's right.
Chris knows a thing or two about Linux. I know a thing or two about Linux.
Yeah, my background was like, I had dial-up at my parents' house, and so I tried to reverse engineer apt-get so that I could download stuff at school and then install it on my computer at home in a faster way. So I ended up teaching myself Python originally because of Linux so that I could, do something cross-platform. But there was this like Ruby language that looked similar and sounded similar, but just people use less of. And so I went into Python originally before I got into Ruby. So it's interesting.
Yeah, right. Well, I think being a high schooler for me was the perfect time to use Linux because I could waste those endless hours on tweaking configurations and trying distros and all that kind of stuff that I really know I don't have the time for these days.
Oh, yeah. There's so many times where I was like fiddling with Compiz, doing the cube and all that setup and making it snow on my desktop. And it was just like, none of this is useful, but my friends think I'm cool. So, what are you working on now? And you're working at a company. Did you help start it, or what are you doing now?
So I work at a company called IceLab. It started a few years before I joined, mostly as a way to sort of do creative digital work, but outside of the traditional sort of corporate advertising business. And I joined a few years after it started. And at that point, the company was doing a lot of Flash and PHP, had a very sort of visual, digital, interactive focus. And I brought the Ruby aspect to our business. And now we have a sort of more serious full stack approach. We still do a lot of digital interactive work, but we can also couple that with fully fledged web applications running on servers. And I've been with them since 2009. We have a great set of clients here in Australia. We get to work with a lot of the cultural sector, being based here in Canberra, which is the capital. We've got a bunch of museums and galleries we get to work with. We also have an office in Melbourne where we get to work with a lot of literary clients, publishers and booksellers. And we also do a bunch of things for science and data visualization sides of things. And it's really rewarding work because it's great content. It's good to get out in the world, and we get to pick the tools that we use to build all these things most of the time, so it's rewarding from the client's perspective, but also from the perspective of developing the thing as well.
So at IceLab, kind of the way I this is a weird word to use, but found you on the internet was a series of articles you wrote on the IceLab blog. I said blog about kind of doing kind of web development in Ruby kind of against the grain, I guess is a good way to put it. More like functional approaches and DryRB, which I want to talk a little bit about DryRB in more detail later. But I guess I kind of, since we're talking about IceLab, how's a typical web application like built at IceLab? If you're using Ruby and not necessarily using Rails, like what are kind of some of the approaches you take?
Well, we still use Rails where it makes the most sense. I guess we're not dogmatic about the approach. We want to use the best tool for the job. So if our clients already have a Rails team or existing Rails apps, we'll use it. But
sure,
where we get the chance, we build our apps with a completely alternative stack, and that's a combination of DryRB gems. We've started using some gems from the Hanami project, and we also use RomRB as our data persistence toolkit, and that's given us a pretty complete ecosystem, and one that's made us really happy with, because a lot of our clients we work with over the space of many, many years. So being a good partner for them is not just about getting something out the door quickly, but it's also getting something out the door that we know we can be good maintainers of down the track, and that won't sort of get anyone stuck in a corner from previous programming decisions that incurs unnecessary costs or time hits to the client when they're trying to evolve their business and change their web applications along with it.
So when you're putting these libraries together, is it kind of are you kind of having to wire them all together, or do you kind of have like a framework that brings them all together?
We have a little gem we've put together to help us generate apps and give us some CLI tools and things like that. It's pretty underbaked, but it gets the job done. And you know what? Copy and paste actually goes a long way when you're doing these things as well. There's no shame in that, I think, if you're just trying to find the best approaches rather than trying to codify them too early.
So we keep kind of talking about DryRB. For maybe those unfamiliar with it, would you mind giving us kind of the high-level overview of what DryRB is?
Yeah, sure. So it's an organization that publishes a range of Ruby gems. I think we have about 18 of them now. And they're all focused on trying to help you write clearer, more flexible, more maintainable Ruby code. And the idea with these gems is that they're not an all-or-nothing approach. The libraries are focused on fulfilling a single task, which means that you can drop them into existing apps if you'd like to empower them in a certain way. But they also form a really compelling stack if you combine them. So we have a bunch of small utility libraries for things like inflections, class and object configuration, mix-ins for equality, just the kind of things you want to do when you're working with Ruby objects. But then we have a range that that offer better data handling. So we have one for strict data types, value object modeling. We have a standalone validation library. Then we have some that deal with, I guess, functional Ruby, for lack of a better name. So you have a library that offers a range of monads that are still quite idiomatic to work with inside the Ruby language, pattern matching library. Then we have a gem called Dry System, which is one that can really help you define a new application architecture. So it's a dependency management system. It's built around an inversion of control container. It's basically a big hash that is the place where you can register all the objects that comprise your system. And it comes with a mix-in to make it really easy to make dependency injection the method which you use to create more complex logic out of smaller parts. And of course, since we're working in Ruby, you can't do that without thinking about the web. So we also have a fully fledged view rendering system as well.
That's quite a lot of stuff. How did all these come together?
One by one, that's for sure. It's been, as an organization, it's been around for getting on 4 years now. It was really sort of the confluence of, I guess, several people out there on the internet feeling like the existing tools in Ruby weren't satisfactory for the way they wanted to write apps. And the nice thing about the internet and about GitHub is that, like you said, Jason, you can discover other Rubyists and you can see the work that they're doing. And that's a nice way to find like-minded people. And I did that. I sort of had seen a talk from Piotr Solnitsa. He's the author of the ROM framework. And sort of just watched what he was tweeting about, watched what he was working on in GitHub. And when he started doing some of this experimental work, just sort of feeling his way around what eventually became all these gems, that's when I sort of reached out and jumped on board and started to pitch in with all of that.
Cool. So it was was it you two that kind of started the project? Or
yeah, when it became official, it was the two of us. Also, Andy Holland. He's the one who actually created the DryRB organization on GitHub and pushed up the first couple of gems. And these days, it's still three of us as sort of the most active on the core team. So Solnik, as he's known on the internet, me, and also Nikita Shilnikov, based in Moscow.
Awesome. What is kind of some of the inspiration, like, from maybe other languages or just kind of ideas that maybe aren't common to Ruby? What are just some inspiration for DryRB?
Well, certainly the functional programming languages have a big inspiration because they give you a different way of looking at applications, more as a flow of data passing through functions rather than sort of objects which try to mimic real world entities. And when you realize that this is a valid way to approach a problem and also a way that can still feel really natural in Ruby, that's when you get a whole new range of possibilities that open themselves up to you about better organizing your application. And they also offer concepts that, we've always implicitly had in Ruby, but we've never sort of formalized in any way, which is why we have a monads library now. And it turns out when you start returning objects that have a consistent interface, like result objects from around all of your business domain objects, then you can start to compose them in really interesting ways. And that's where you can make applications that can be broken down into small parts, and then those parts can be then recombined to form more expressive effects.
I recently put dry transaction into a project. In the past, I've used the Interactor gem or Interactor Rails, which is really nice. Like, I have no complaints about it. But one of the things I loved about using dry transaction was that I could it returns a monad. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, that's right. The result object, basically.
Right. Yeah, I loved that. Like, so I was using it in the context of like a Rails controller. That I love that I could just be like, call this, and then give it a block that's like, on success, do this. If it returns not like a failure, do this. Like, it just felt so. I don't even know the actual term I'm looking for, but like, it was a joy to use.
Oh, that's great. And I think the benefit of that approach is that you're forced to think about the failure path as well. You can't just ignore it. And it's pretty easy to ignore. Well, we know nil is pervasive throughout all of our language, but as an indication of failure, it's not very expressive. So having something that just helps add a little extra structure around that kind of process is, I think, really clarifies the way you handle things inside your apps.
The thing I found beneficial about like thinking about failure is I think it's what is termed as like the railway approach. Mm-hmm. And so like with these interactors I build, like you can like cause them to fail and stuff, but it's a lot more, I feel like for like each idea I have, for lack of a better term, like in an interactor, I'm building a lot of like conditional branches for it to fail. And I feel like using like transaction, where I can just be like return failure and this is what you give it, helps me like be able to kind of dissect these things down. And like you said, like think about failure more. Mm-hmm. And so I felt that like when I was done writing out a transaction, I felt really confident in like how it worked. So we had Luca on with Hanami several weeks ago, and he was, talking about Hanami 2.0 and that DryRB team and the ROM team and Hanami are like all three working very closely for Hanami 2.0. I'm curious, not to like put you on the spot here, but if you think that like once 2.0 is out, will you find yourself, you think, using Hanami more since it'll be kind of more integrated with all these projects that you already find yourself involved with?
Yeah, I think I will. I mean, I'm super excited to be working on it and helping to bring forward this vision for version 2. And so many of our goals were in alignment, so I think it made complete sense for our teams to work together. And, you asked about how ISAB builds apps, and, we have a gem that's all on its own to give us a CLI and tooling and defaults and all that kind of thing, which is all well and good, but ideally, we don't need to be marooned on this little island with our bespoke Ruby stack. If we can work with the community to create a nice out of the box experience and evolve it the kind that Hanami already offers, then that's all the better. And it means we can sort of join a larger community and contribute back to that community as well. And in fact, we're already using it. I've started working with Hanami Router, Hanami Controller inside our apps at IceLab using the unstable branches of those, just because I can't seem to help myself but put IceLab on the bleeding edge.
You renegade.
But I think that's actually really great. It's a way of contributing to the development because there's nothing like real usage to shake out all the issues that you might need to fix before you offer a fully released version to the broader community. And the nice thing as well is that I was able to slot those things in to our existing apps without having to change anything, because I should have mentioned this before when you asked about how I build apps, but they're really clearly layered. So we have a core, which is the business objects, the domain layer, which expresses the application's key functionality, and that's an isolated core. And then around that, we layer on external interfaces. So we were previously working with Rhoda as a routing interface, and I wanted to try the Hanami tools, and so I could just take away that one aspect, slot in the new router and the new controller gems, and the rest of the app would go on undisturbed because it was isolated from the concerns about that external interface. And the same thing down the other end. So we have ROM as our persistence toolkit, and that is separate from the domain layer, and it just hands over value objects. And that means that, again, the persistence concern is not all muddied up with the domain concern. So once you start to architect applications in the way that these tools encourage you to do and want you to do, you actually get all this untold flexibility that you may actually be able to leverage at some point in the future.
That's awesome. Staying kind of within the DryRB category before we move on, you recently gave a talk at RubyConf Australia about DryView, and if I'm not mistaken, you are kind of the spearhead behind DryView, correct?
Yeah, I think we've been the biggest users, and I've done most of the work on it since the very early days, yes.
Would you mind kind of explaining DryView, maybe at a high level, some of the approaches you're taking, and if that is something that will be also in Hanami 2.0?
Yeah, so DryView is a standalone view rendering system, and I guess even at that point, the word standalone is important because it means that you can use this from any framework. As long as you're using Ruby, you're good to go. And then once you are using it, how you use it's up to you as well, because it's standalone. You can integrate it into whatever aspect of your application. And so we use it for rendering views as web responses, as most of us do. But we also use it for rendering emails within our application. So we have exactly the same tooling and templating available to us for emails as well as web responses. And I guess the thing that DryView offers is a range of different places for you to put your view logic. I really have pushed on this development because I think views in Ruby have been pretty underserved as an area of development. Rails 1.0 shipped with controllers, templates, helpers, and it hasn't changed since then. And those are just not enough places to put view logic, in my opinion. So DryView gives you a much wider range. Each view in that system is itself, firstly, a standalone class and gives you a standalone object. And your view accepts input and it returns an output. So in that way, it's kind of just a data transformation that you can then string up to whatever other series of operations you want when you're building your app. But inside of it, it offers this whole organizing structure around where the logic should go. So each view has a series of exposures, and that's making clear the kind of the values that you want to pass to your template. So each exposure can deal with whatever input parameters it needs. So say if you're making a view for showing an article, like you want an article slug, and then the article exposure will take that slug and then work with an injected dependency, like an article repository, to get the article and then pass it to the template. And then once you're in the template, all of those values get wrapped in what we call view parts. We chose a different name to sort of get ourselves away from the baggage of decorators, but that's essentially what it is. So it gives you a place to put view logic that's specific to any given value. And the nice thing about these view parts is that anything you can do in a template, you can also do inside methods in these Ruby classes. So activities like rendering partials, which, as far as I'm aware until now have always been a template concern, you can actually do inside your part classes. So this means that you can always express your output in the most natural way. If it means building up a template with your nested divs and classes and everything, well, you can still do that. but then you can hide the details of that behind a method on a part class, which you can then also go on and unit test in complete isolation. Every aspect of the dry view system is unit testable, from views as views themselves to part classes. We also have classes for scopes, and the idea of a scope is that you might want some extra behavior to sit alongside a particular template rather than a particular value. All of those are unit testable, which means that, and all of those have access to every feature of the view system. So it's a really coherent, integrated system, but also one that makes it easy for you to break up your view logic and make it reusable and make it testable. And the goal I have with all of this is to make it so that the view layer isn't where good design goes to die. It's a layer where you can still follow all the good guiding practices that help us towards writing better object-oriented code. That should really be our goal everywhere. And in fact, I mean, this is actually one of the things that has made me so happy to be part of the DryRB project. If we're talking about good object-oriented code, years ago when I discovered Sandy Metz's PUDA book, Practical Object-Oriented Design in Ruby book, I would read it and I'd be so fired up and I'd go, yes, this is how I'm going to write my applications. This is the future. And then I'd go back to my code base and I'd be scratching my head because I wouldn't know where to start. None of the tools that we used as a community actually make it easy to follow the kind of approaches that Sandy advocates. And you have to go against the grain of those tools to do it. And that's a really hard thing to do if you don't have any help. But with the DryRB tools, hopefully we're offering something that that fully supports this kind of design from the ground up. And it makes the right thing to do also the easy thing to do when you're working with these tools. And I think that's really powerful.
That's awesome. I was just sitting here grinning when you were talking about like reading the book and then like sitting down to code after that. Because like that happens with me even outside of like Sandy's books. Like I get real excited about a thing and then I'm like, how do I do this?
Okay.
So you were recently Ruby Tapas chef, if you will. Mm-hmm. You did a 3-part series, which I think is like a record for a guest chef, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
On ROM-RB. And so I just wanted to ask if you wouldn't mind explaining kind of how you came to use ROM and also I guess a high-level overview for those who might not be familiar with it.
So ROM stands for the Ruby Object Mapper. It's a data persistence toolkit for Ruby. And despite containing all of the letters of the acronym, it's not an ORM in the traditional sense. But ROM is really what got it started for me in the beginning. The reason why I started looking for other people doing different kinds of work in Ruby was that, at Icesaber, an agency, we build a lot of fresh apps every year. And I found myself ending up painting myself to the same corner again and again and again. And this was despite all my best intentions. I'd want to do the right things, both in terms of the code quality, but also in terms of the client. When you're under commercial, and our budgets, so when you're under commercial pressure, you want to ship something fast. And Rails gives you a lot of quote unquote sharp knives that help you do that. But they come with these drawbacks when you consider the aspect of ease of long-term maintenance. And I would continue to make that trade-off and get caught up, sometime down the track where that maintenance had become really hard. And I just wasn't feeling good about the code I was shipping. And I think at the center of that, Active Record was really part of the problems. It does give us a really easy way to get up and running with a database, but the result of that is you end up carrying these objects passing unfettered database access to every single corner of your application. And if you said to someone, well, hey, let's design a whole Ruby app inside our database driver, well, no one would think that's a good approach. And that's just how it is, though. And because of the centrality of those Active Record objects to your Rails apps, I think you also lose the ability to express any nuance when it comes to how you might want to deal with data in many different ways. And so ROM promised something better and something that recognized that data access, well, it might need to happen in a whole range of different ways, with each one of them being just a little bit different across the whole of an app. And so it comes out of the box with all these tools that help you cleanly separate your persistence layer from the domain layer. And doing that, I think, has really great benefits for both of those layers. It means the domain layer can be designed in a way that's true to itself, It doesn't have to worry about those external concerns like database access. And then over in the persistence layer, you can really focus on the nitty gritty of query logic and leverage whatever features of the database you want in order to achieve the data structures you want. And then when things move across that boundary, we do that via repository classes. So that's the pattern that ROM follows. That gives you repository classes, and then inside them, you effectively build your own fit-for-purpose persistence API. So you have to think about your data access requirements and then give each one of them a name, both for reads and writes. And that's a really powerful approach, because by naming something, you help clarify your intentions, and you give yourself this exact one place in your app to look when it comes to working out how you access your data. It's not spread around anymore. And then when you return the data from those repositories, they come out just as that, data. So the objects are value objects that we pass around our domain layer. They hold data only. We're no longer at risk of N+1 queries. And it means you can actually shape those into whatever way your domain layer requires. So you're not coupling your domain to the design of your database anymore. You can make the right calls for the integrity of your data, and then you can translate that into whatever shape data makes most sense for the actual objects you're working inside your application. And in doing all of that, well, the side effect of that is that I've also gotten so much better at writing SQL. It's just not funny. And that's an amazing feeling as well. I feel like I'm in better control of the tools that I'm using. And I remember at the RailsConf keynote, I watched it from last year, and DHH talked about conceptual compression as an idea with tools like Active Record, meaning that it's no longer necessary for some people to learn SQL. And I can sympathize with that in a way that helps someone just starting out. But I think for any non-trivial application, you need to know what's going on at that layer, because data, firstly, it can cripple you really easily, but also databases are getting so much better these days. Every Postgres release just amazes me. And to wall yourself off from that is just making your life harder. So I think we should be using databases for everything they're worth. And ROM lets you do this and do it in a way that lets you contain all of that specialized code in one place and not have that leak out into anywhere in the rest of your app.
Shifting gears here quite a bit. From afar over here in US land, I've never been to Australia, but I've met two Rubyists from Australia, you and Tom Ridge. And from what I can tell, there seems to be a pretty vibrant Ruby community there. So as an Australian, what is the Ruby community like over there?
I think given the size of our country and the spread of people in our country, it's pretty tight-knit, actually. Melbourne and Sydney, being the biggest cities, have the most activity. But most major cities here have a monthly meetup, which is great. But that's great for people within the city, but it's not the kind of thing that helps foster a sort of nationwide community. So we've actually had events called Rails Camps that have run twice a year since 2007. And they're the sort of thing where they're spread to the US now and various other places. So some of your listeners might be familiar with them, but the idea is that you go to some semi-remote location, and in the early days that meant zero internet access. It's changed a bit now with better cell coverage, but you go to a scout camp or something out in the bush for 3 nights, and you just hack on projects, you share some talks, enjoy the company of your fellow Rubyists. And the joke now is that no one writes Rails at Rails Camp, but it's just a great sort of festival of people who are interested in technology and share sort of similar ideas and principles and fascinations to you. And so that's a great way. It's been a great way to make friends from all across the country. And they happen regularly enough that you can sort of maintain these relationships. And as of the last 7 years, we also have a big conference in the summer, which just sort of bolsters that as well. We've just finished our RubyConf. It was last week in Melbourne, and those conferences are fantastic. They're community-led. The volunteers do an amazing job, and they've always been able to get speakers from internationally across, as well as highlighting the best of our local talent. So it's a great way for us to see each other, but also get a bit of a taste for what's going on around the world as well.
If there is ever a need for a bleep button, it was when this past week, you gave a talk, and then like 20 minutes later, it was online because I cussed out loud. It was like, my conference was in August and I haven't posted any of the videos.
Yeah.
Is mind-boggling.
We were all just amazed. No one knew that was coming, and then we just saw these tweets linking to YouTube videos, and yeah, it was just a fantastic job.
I just want to throw my phone across the room. But it was cool because I was watching it, and then Shannon came in the room and was like, what are you doing? And I was like, he just gave this talk like an hour ago. So I'm watching it. And kind of on that topic, I'm always enamored by your talks. I think you're a very talented speaker. Maybe I'm just enamored by your accent. I don't know. But I'm curious kind of how you found yourself giving talks, because the year you came to Southeast Ruby, you like left and went to another country that wasn't home. Like you were like doing a world tour. So how did you find yourself there?
That was unexpected. That year I gave my second ever conference talk that year, and that was at RubyConf AU, and it was about dry RB stuff, as you'd expect. And then one thing led to another, and then there I was. But that was, it was a fantastic way to meet different people, learn about different communities. But just in terms of talking, I guess, I was using Ruby for 14, 15 years before I felt like I had something to talk about, at least in terms of sort of conference level presentations. But yeah, this was aligned with me discovering all the things we talked about today and getting involved in that. And I feel like so much of open source success is about marketing and word of mouth at a face-to-face level. And, so I was more than happy to sort of put myself out there as a messenger and cheerleader. And it just turned out that the Ruby community happened to be receptive to it, which I think is a really great sign. And, the exercise of making a talk I enjoy as well, because it's a good check for whether your tools or ideas are resolved enough in and of themselves. And so I think it's an important part in developing all these open source tools, is that how they're being accepted by the community, how can you easily convey their ambitions and philosophies in a 20-minute window. So that's how I wound up doing it. But I guess having started talking after such a long time of not doing it, I think it's a good reminder that you can spend a long time with the language and continue to make discoveries at any point in that journey and find new ways to be productive with it and find new love for working with it. And you never know when you might just hit on something that's really important, not just to you, but a wide range of people. So that's, I love Ruby. That's why I continue to work with it and stick to it, because it's a language that can help us do so much. And I think with the community interested in hearing different ideas and, ideas that are sort of still being proven, I think it's a really good sign for the health of our community.
Yeah, I agree. Chris, you've been awfully quiet. You got anything interesting to ask?
Oh, no, but for anyone that's interested in ROM and dry RB and things like that, where would you send them?
The respective websites are both pretty good, I think. So dry-rb.org and rom-rb.org both have a full set of docs. If you're on Ruby Tapas and you're interested in working with a database in a new way, definitely look for those episodes. And I think I'll be able to share them more broadly in a few months as well. So they'll go into the ROM site. Aside from that, I slowly try and build fully fledged open source example apps, but there's nothing I can point to right now. I just encourage people to look at the range of gems, see if one of them stands out to them as expressing a solution to a need that they've felt, and just give it a go. So many can be just dropped into your existing apps. And then once you start using it, you get a taste for the principles and design approach that we use across the whole range. And, one thing might lead to another.
Yeah, and you can even do like ROM RB inside a Rails app or whatever. Like you wouldn't have to really step out too far from your boundaries if you're, comfortable with Rails.
Yeah, ROM-RB actually ships with a ROM-Rails gem. I haven't used it myself, but I think it has a bunch of people who are using it. So it just gives you the rail tie and a bunch of sort of setup nicety, so you can try ROM inside of Rails. I mean, that is a fairly big jump because Active Record is sort of so central to the Rails promise, but it's totally worth trying. I guess I could also use this call as a shout out to anyone who's interested in writing better views in Rails, where there's an open issue to build a dry view rail tie and integration gem. I've started some of it in an example app inside the dry view repo, but I think dry view could be the gateway drug to some of this as well. Because I feel like it just makes building views so much better. And that is the kind of thing that I think could drop into a Rails app, and you could still use most of the Railsisms just from within a better sort of structured environment.
I'll have you know, I consider myself a DryRB committer now.
Yeah, thanks for your website fix.
Added a Z index
Yep.
and putting DryRB committer on all my things now.
Nice. Welcome to the team, Jason.
I'm bowing right now.
I'll assign you some issues later on.
Thanks for all your work in the open source community. I reread those initial blog posts that like brought me to your site several times a year, because all the work I do pretty much is still Rails apps, but I find the way of thinking to help me kind of build what I consider to be better Rails apps. So Thanks for all your contributions there.
Oh, you're welcome. And I think that's a good point to make, is that writing better architected applications isn't necessarily about tool A versus tool B. It's about the mindset, and trying different things out. Yeah, can it help expand that mindset? And then you can take those learnings back into your own applications. And there's never a better time than the current moment to start adding some extra structure and improving the way you arrange your code.
So we talked about where they can find DryRB and ROM online. Where can they find you online?
I am on Twitter, but trying not to be there so much because it's pretty toxic company environment. But I'm on Mastodon. So if you're a part of that world, I'm on mastodon.social. Otherwise, I have timriley.info as my shiny new personal website. So that's probably the best place to go.
Cool. Chris, any closing thoughts? Things you want to talk about? Anything?
Not that I can think of off the top of my head, but I'm going to have to take some time to explore. Maybe I'll make a few screencasts too of some ROM or DryRB stuff.
Wonderful. Tim, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Chris, I will talk to you again next week.
Alrighty.
Bye.
Cheerio.